All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're tackling Yuval Noah Harari's Sapiens. It's a mind-blowing exploration of, well, us. How did we go from just another ape to the rulers of the planet?
And get this, Sapiens isn't your typical history book. It throws out the old timelines and makes you question what you thought you knew about being human. It's fascinating.
Okay, so let's start with this cognitive revolution thing. It sounds kind of sci-fi, to be honest. What was it, and what makes it so important in the story of Sapiens?
Picture this. 70,000 years ago, something big happened. Our sapiens ancestors, they developed this ability to think in totally new ways, mainly through language.
Okay, but language, how did that make us so special?
It wasn't just simple communication like, hey, look, a mammoth. It was about imagining things that aren't actually real.
Wait, what? Imagining things that aren't real. How'd that help us take over the world?
That's the key. Think about it. Myths, stories, gods, even countries. Those don't exist in the physical world, right? They're all in our minds. It's this shared imagination that allowed sapiens to cooperate in huge numbers, like way more than any other species. That's how we outcompeted them. That's the foundation of civilization.
So it's like we unlocked some secret level of collaboration, and our imaginations were the cheat code.
Exactly. And we see evidence of this early on. Harari talks about these burial sites. Sungir in Russia. Archaeologists found this grave, 30,000 years old, this young boy, only 12 years old, buried with thousands of ivory beads, all meticulously made. And he was dressed in incredibly elaborate clothing.
Wow, thousands of beads. That must have taken like forever to make back then.
Right. Imagine the skill, the organization involved.
It makes you wonder, was this kid some kind of king? Did they have social hierarchies back then, even then?
It's definitely possible. Some experts think so, seeing it as early signs of inherited power and all that. But it's tough to say for sure. We got to be careful not to project our modern ideas onto the past.
Yeah.
It's so easy to jump to hierarchy when we see something so complex through a lens of thousands of years.
Yeah, good point. It's like looking at a totally different culture today. You can't just assume their rules are the same as ours.
Okay, so we've gone from this cognitive revolution, learning to cooperate, to, well, the agricultural revolution. We're always told farming was a good thing, but Harari doesn't seem so sure. He calls it the luxury trap. And it's fascinating. For most of human history, we were hunter-gatherers, roaming around, eating all sorts of things. Probably had a decent amount of free time, too. But farming, it meant settling down.
But didn't it make things more stable?
Sure, a steadier food supply, but it wasn't all sunshine and roses. It meant longer working hours, more diseases from being around animals all the time, and a bigger risk of starvation if the crops failed.
So it's like a trade-off, right? I mean, did we domesticate plants or did plants domesticate us?
Exactly. And, this luxury trap idea, it's not just ancient history. Think about us today and technology. Smartphones, the internet, they make life easier in so many ways, but also bring their own anxieties, their own pressures. Are we really any freer than our hunter-gatherer ancestors, or just stuck in a different kind of trap?
Wow, that's a scary thought. Really makes you think about what progress actually means.
Right. And that's the beauty of Sapiens. It forces us to face these hard truths about ourselves, about our history, about what we think we know.
Mm.
One of the things that really gets you thinking in Sapiens is how, fragile everything is. Take
Yeah.
money, for instance.
Oh yeah, money. It's this whole imagine order thing, right?
Yeah.
But it's so strange when you actually think about it. I mean, it's just paper. Or even weirder now, just numbers on a screen. How did we all decide that this stuff is so important?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it gets to this core idea in Sapiens, the imagined order. It's like this web we've woven made up of shared stories, myths, ideas that helps us make sense of the world. And it lets us cooperate on a massive scale. Money, empires, religions, even human rights, those aren't things that exist naturally. They exist because we all agree to believe in them.
So we're all kind of living in this like shared hallucination.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's this hallucination that lets us build cities, trade across the entire planet, even think about stuff like climate change as a global problem. Money, it's the perfect example. It's all about trust. We accept a dollar bill for something because we trust that other people will accept that dollar bill later on.
Right. It's not like a dollar's good for much on its own.
Exactly. Usually there's something backing it up, like a government or gold or whatever. But even then, it boils down to believing in a system.
Okay, but how do we even get to this point? It's not like people just woke up one day and were like, hey, let's use shells as money.
It happens slowly, and Harari, he breaks it down so well. He talks about how, way back, the earliest forms of money, like barley in ancient Sumeria, they were linked to something physical, something useful in itself.
Right, like you could actually eat barley.
Exactly. But as societies got bigger, more complex, using actual stuff as money, it just wasn't practical.
Can you imagine trying to pay your taxes in barley?
Right. Talk about an inconvenient trip to the whatever they had back then. So coinage, those little metal coins, that was way more efficient. Standardized values, small and portable, that's what made it work.
So coinage, that's what really kicked things into gear.
Definitely. Now you could trade over longer distances, build up wealth in totally new ways. It paved the way for empires, global trade networks, all that.
And speaking of empires and global trade, Harari tells this wild story about the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, like a company conquering islands? That's just crazy.
It's a crazy story. And it really shows you how powerful these early corporations could be. The VOC, they were basically like a mini country. They had their own army and navy. They could start wars, make treaties, even print their own money.
Wow, they were like the Google or Amazon of their day or something.
Right. All about the bottom line. But their actions changed the world. They redrew the map, left their mark on the places they colonized.
It really makes you think about corporate power today, huh?
No doubt. But let's switch gears a bit. We've been talking money, empires. But how did we go from all these separate civilizations to the interconnected world we live in now? How do we overcome all those differences in language, culture, beliefs, and actually start to create something kind of like a global community?
That's a huge question, right? Like the world's so interconnected now. Harari talks about how we're not just connected, but kind of rely on each other now, the whole planet. So how do we even get to this point?
Harari, he points to three big things: empires, money, and, this one might surprise you, religion.
Religion. But haven't religions caused like tons of conflicts and divisions throughout history?
Oh, absolutely. But they've also been this, like, uniting force, especially when you have religions that talk about universal beliefs, stuff everyone should value. Think about Christianity, Buddhism. Those spread way beyond where they started, right?
Yeah.
Connecting people across huge distances through shared beliefs, a shared way of seeing the world. That created this feeling of belonging that went beyond borders, cultures, all that.
So it's like a different kind of shared story, like we talked about before, but this one could unite people across entire empires.
Exactly. And this whole interconnected thing, it just keeps growing with things like global trade, right?
Yeah.
Fueled by, you guessed it, money. As money became more standardized, easier to use all over, it created new ways for cultures to mix, for people to interact. But of course, it wasn't always peaceful, right? Empires definitely shaped the world, but often through conquest, colonization, not pretty stuff at all.
So it's like this weird double-edged sword. Globalization, whether it's through empires, money, religion, it brings us closer, but it also shines a light on our differences, even makes some problems worse.
Exactly. And that leads to another tension Harari talks about, this tension between everyone being equal and individual freedom. Seems like we want both, but they often clash.
Totally. It's like we're always trying to figure out that balance, right? Between freedom to do our own thing and responsibility to everyone else. How do you even build a society that can do both?
That's the question, isn't it? Philosophers, revolutionaries, they've been wrestling with that forever. Harari thinks it's key to understanding, like, the whole point of human history. He uses the example of knights, back in medieval Europe. They had this code of chivalry, all about individual bravery, loyalty, all that.
Right, protecting the weak, all that jazz.
Exactly. But then you had the church at the same time, preaching humility, compassion, putting others first. Two very different ideas of, like, what it means to actually be a good person, each pulling society in opposite directions.
Wow, that kind of feels relevant even today. It's like those debates about, like, social programs, welfare. Some people say it makes things fairer, helps those in need. Others say it makes people dependent, kills their drive to succeed on their own.
It's a debate that's not going away anytime soon. But then, just when you think you've wrapped your head around all these forces shaping humanity, Harari throws another curveball, the scientific revolution. But get this, he says it wasn't about more knowledge, but more ignorance. Doesn't that seem kind of backwards?
It does. But knowing Harari, there's got to be a good explanation.
Right. And he's got a point. What made the scientific revolution different was a shift in how we think. Instead of clinging to old ideas, assuming we had it all figured out, scientists started embracing doubt, questioning everything, wanting proof.
So being okay with not knowing everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Admitting our ignorance was what unlocked all these new discoveries.
Mhm.
Think about it. We went from not even knowing germs existed to understanding DNA, the building blocks of life, from stuck on Earth to sending probes across the solar system.
And now we're talking about artificial intelligence, changing our genes, stuff that used to be pure science fiction.
It's mind-blowing. But all this progress, it brings new questions, ethical ones. Harari talks about the Gilgamesh Project, this age-old human desire to live forever. With all the advances we're making, we might actually be getting close. But should we?
Right. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. That's a heavy one.
It is. And that's where Sapiens leaves you with a lot to think about. Harari says we often forget about happiness in this whole story of progress. We've achieved so much. But are we happier than our hunter-gatherer ancestors? Have we just traded one set of problems for a whole other set?
That's kind of a depressing thought, honestly. All this progress, and we're still figuring out how to be happy.
It's a question each of us has to answer for ourselves, right? No easy solutions. But by looking at our history, the things that have shaped us, the choices we've made, maybe we can at least approach that question with more, I don't know, wisdom, a better sense of what matters.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's not about having the answer, but being willing to ask the question, to grapple with the big stuff and decide what kind of future we want. And Sapiens really gives you the tools to think about all of that. Well, folks, that about wraps up our deep dive into Yuval Noah Harari's Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. We hope this has sparked some curiosity, made you want to grab a copy and explore these ideas for yourself. Remember, this was just a taste, a starting point. There's so much more to uncover, so much to ponder. Until next time, keep those questions coming and keep exploring the big, fascinating story of humanity.